Hi again. Since we started doing these videos, one of the more persistent requests was for us to enter into some of our spiritual ideas. And traditionally, we've often tried to stay away from mixing that with our politics, but lately we've been less resistant to doing that. And should be remembered that although Spot's household shares a body, in many ways we're distinct individuals, so our religious beliefs are not always exactly online with each other's. Um, but what we're going to be reading today is a pamphlet that had been written by Elizabeth of Spot's household, who identifies as an anarcho Catholic. And by that, um, she accepts much of the practice of Catholicism in terms of the seven corporal acts of mercy, the concept of loving God best by loving each other. She believes in various monastic disciplines in order to develop a practice through vocation and so forth. But she rejects the hierarchy, particularly the patriarchal hierarchy of the church, due to certain things about our past. Um, Actually, we should explain that our life was significantly changed by an interaction with a nun who allowed our father to become a significant ally to us, and then, because of the whole ramifications of Vatican II, her order was uh, disformed or disbanded, so she basically became a defrocked nun. Um, for reasons that weren't very clear to us. And since then, we've seen problems with a patriarchal hierarchy. We have a certain amount of respect for the current pope, but there's so many ways. I mean, the whole thing about Brazil that happened because of the elections, you know, where he took a political stance that the right wing, which crapped all over his reforms anyway, used to seize power. And, you know, in terms of COVID response, they're falling behind the US. And so, to some degree, the Pope's hand is as bloody in Brazil as Mike Pence's is in the United States, as or Mitch McConnell, as an enabler in chief of letting people like that get into power. So let me read this. This pamphlet is called The Eye of the Needle. Can Rich Folks Go to Heaven? Many who treat the Bible as gospel. Let me pause there. Didn't want the dogs barking to be a problem. Um, Many who treat the Bible as gospel don't realize how often its meaning has changed in translating it into English. My favorite example of this is the Golden Rule, which in its original tongue is a double negative. Do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. So much is lost in English linguistic imperative to simplify meaning. The prohibition against witches could as easily be translated to not tolerating poisoners. Then there is a comparison to a rich man entering heaven with a camel passing through the eye of a needle. It's likely the original language referred not to an animal, but a very thick, coarse twine made from that animal's hair. That changes the feet from one impossible to even imagine to one seemingly still impossible, yet not unimaginably so. If you ever tried to thread a needle with yarn, rough yarn too large for its eye, you might understand that by seemingly we mean it's impossible for the yarn to thread the needle as is. With determination and effort, you can force a bit of yarn far enough to get a bite or a grip on it, and as you tug and pull through that bit, through the yarn becomes undone, with much or most of it being stripped away from those strands that do pass through. Now, it's very possible that here's a deeper understanding in that may have been lost in translation, especially as one considers an olden attitude toward capitalism. And remember that in all the New Testament, the only group that Jesus offered violence to were the money changers when he drove from the temple with the whip, excluding a brief period historically of the transatlantic slave trade, although that it affected many, many, many more people than other periods of time because it was a global enterprise and during a global exploitation time. But historically, it was a very short period of time. And if you exclude that, debt had historically surpassed all the roots from freedom to slavery. Um, Many pagan cultures to whom mobile wealth meant cattle saw interest as an abomination because, unlike cattle, gold does not in nature reproduce. But interest treats gold as if it can, and it does. And as we look at the ultimate effect of capitalism, how it's killing us and our planet, we see the fruit to which this very abomination was the seed. Now, in his book, The Iron Heel, Jack London's hero addresses a group of philanthropists explaining a fundamental problem with capitalism. If ownership of a factory gives the capitalist the right to most of the factory's production, if in fact it only gives him half of that production, it doesn't change the fact that he can only personally consume so much as an individual. Waste, extravagance, conspicuous consumption can only go so far in correcting this. So, lacking a systemic, viable redistribution of wealth, uh, that wealth can only be sustained through expansion of markets. Thus, capitalism expands to imperialism, and eventually, as new markets evolve and run out within a finite world, imperialism contracts into fascism. And if the system allows no natural limit to accumulation of wealth. And I'm going to pull for a second off this because that's a kind of an important part. I mean, pamphlets only allow so much time to get in there. Um, when we talk about redistribution of wealth, in communism, there wouldn't be a redistribution of wealth because there's no exploitation of classes. You only have systems of redistribution of wealth in areas where wealth accumulates into a small percentage of people. That's why you have the potlatch in some cultures. Uh, that's why you have, things where in the Middle Ages where people purposely ripped clothes to give to the poor. You had, the if you read the 13th Warrior, Michael Crichton's book, parts of it comes from more ancient writing of an actual Arab talking about his interactions with the Vikings, and he talks about in that book the concept of why redistribution of wealth is important and how different cultures have that as he's going through these different cultures traveling with the Vikings. So it's like feudal cultures had redistribution, all things that had exploitations where people accumulated wealth eventually had redistribution of wealth. That's why money is called currency because it travels around, but if it accumulates into one part, or it could be called hoarding wealth, it doesn't work. And so when we talk about redistribution of wealth, we're not talking about communism, we're talking about everything else, right? Um, so um, So it's all, it's all a system that has no natural limit to wealth. So greed, miserly hoarding, wasteful greed, accumulation of wealth beyond what you can reasonably consume, and requiring reinvestment to produce and accumulate even more unused product merely to maintain the value of itself. Today, with currency based on production, this mandate to produce unneeded and unused wealth is even further expanded, while the ramification within a finite system becomes more blatant. So let's move on to the assumption that capitalism is bad. That's all about. I'm going to get to individuals who buy into that. Mamat is the deification of currency, the mathematically based process of reducing all things into a compatible abstract value with the worth based on each item valued as a commodity rather than its use value. So while on TV shows now, we may wonder about artificial intelligence, our reality has long had legally recognized artificial persons, corporations controlled by the most simplistic algorithms, show profit in the next quarter that directs a cadre of capitalists in the service of Muhammad, you know, reputedly himself a good servant while notoriously bad master. Think of the path these men and women walk where good is reflected in profit, where that which reduces profit is bad, where that which increases profit is good, and where all problems will be resolved if we serve a market that allows profit to thrive, and all foundations will crumble that do not bow down to its drive to profit more. Now, you might begin to walk this path at a very young age, uh, turning a blind eye, if not a broad back, to any of the many advantages the state secures, the privilege of your class, and then try not to become any more aware as you support tax cuts. And you turn your back on the productive, deserving worker whose hours you cut by four on the establishment's biggest weekend because labor costs were going over a fixed percentage and your bonus affirms you were in the right. And you turn your back on the almost friend you lay off for so close to the same region. Perhaps you make a symbolic stand to save a park and you miss it still when your work brings you to where it had been. If you're good enough at ignoring things, you might not realize the truth you're not seeing is the truth you're hiding. But if you're a good enough servant of Muhammad, you soon enough turn your back on the people from whom you hide truth, things they should and need to know in order to make sound and informed decisions in doing business with your corporation. So you'll be required within the philosophy of Adam Smith, as you would be required in then perhaps it's not just truth you're hiding, but lies. This is the thing about epiphanies. It's not just a sudden light that shows you things as they are meant to be, or as they could be, or as they will be. It's a light that shows all that hides in the shadows of your ignorance. And for the rich folk, it shows all the rough strands of fiber that must be stripped away to pass through the eye of the needle. And I hope that's all the time we have for. Again, we encourage you to subscribe, we encourage you to like, and have a nice day.